Hello and welcome to Family Business Central Business Governance 201. This is one of 6 webinars that we have developed under our 201 series. And this is focusing particularly around the areas of business governance and, as a family business, what you need to be aware of and need to be thinking around on this. The other 5 webinars cover family governance, family communication, managing family conflict, business and strategy, and finally, a webinar that we're calling Be Your Best Generation, which is really talking about succession, but coming at it from a different angle. So these all will be up on our YouTube channel, and we hope that you're able to get a chance to have a look at them and share them with your family. So, to this particular webinar, business governance is something that for a lot of family businesses just tends to happen. And it's something that in the beginning, that's fine. But as the business grows, and particularly as you start moving through or having the next generations come through, it becomes more and more important to get clear, to get stable. And we know that businesses, for example, that have a good board thrive and grow. We know that we know several businesses that have had it particularly tough through the pandemic, and it has been their board that has really been able to guide them and help with advice and what to do and how to manage the particular situation, to the point where those businesses will all survive. But having that board was a really key part of this. Now, for any of you who have attended any of our other webinars or workshops that we run, you probably are familiar with this diagram. This is really laying out the difference between what we describe as family governance, which we cover in detail in the family governance webinar, versus what is business governance. And so we're focusing very much on the right-hand side. If you're not a family business, if you're just a normal, SME or business of some size, really you only need to focus on the right-hand side. It's when you are a family that you have to have both, and they're very, very important. So the business governance side, and we will be covering this, is what is the deal around shareholders? What does this mean? What are the implications? Directors, and by directors, if you have a director, you have a board. Some family businesses don't believe they have a board, but you've got a director, there's your board effectively on that. But there are 2 broad types of board that you can set up, and I'll go through these in quite a lot of detail: an advisory board versus a board of directors, and there's pros and cons, and I will go through that, and as I said, in quite a lot of detail later on in this webinar. And then, of course, you've got, under the business governance side of things, your executive. Now, I'm covering less of that today. I'll be talking much more about that in the business and strategy webinar, but I will be covering a little bit here. And of course, under business governance, you get a number of these issues around shareholders agreements, potential trust structures or company structures. There may be board or business constitutions and charters and trust agreements. Now, we will not be going into a great deal on this. This is a very specialized area. I know a lot of family businesses have very detailed and specialist setups using trusts and other companies to manage and protect the assets. We won't be covering that. That is not our area of expertise, but we know people who do that and do that exceedingly well. And it is something to, as your business grows, to really start exploring and talking about. On the other side, which balances out this business governance, is family governance. And so family charter, family council, family forum, succession plans, estate planning, that sort of thing. And as I said, that we've gone into great detail in the other webinar on family governance. So let's have a look at business governance for a second. Really, as I said, we're looking at these 2 areas, the board and the shareholders. And I'm also particularly interested in the interaction between the board and the shareholders and the family. If you think about it, the family council, which is a critical part of your family governance, is to the family what the board is to the business. And they are both critically important. They often talk to one another. Often they've got a lot of people, similar people on the board and in the family council. As your business grows and evolves, that becomes less and less. As your business gets more complex and bigger, You often will bringing in other non-executive directors onto your board. You may have a non-family chair, and we know that's worked exceedingly well in a couple of our clients, non-family chairman. And often that chairman will go over to the family council and talk to the family council and get a sense of, both update the family council, but also get a sense of what are the wishes of the family. I'll talk about that as we go a little bit later on. So effectively, the question is, why bother? Right? You know, a lot of family businesses go along just fine without doing this stuff. You know, you've already got shareholders. You know, someone has shares, someone owns this business somewhere, somehow. There are also already directors, at least one. There has to be on that. However, there are real and significant responsibilities. And as your business grows, these become more and more important. And we will start laying out those responsibilities. The other thing is, you really want to get the most out of this. You know, we've seen some incredibly wonderful things that boards, whether it's an advisory board or board of directors, do for family businesses. To be honest, we've seen a couple of examples where it hasn't worked. And I think that's really what this boils down to, is the selection of who you get to be on your board. In one case, I'm thinking of board members were selected because they had very extensive large corporate experience. Now that's great, but what they didn't know is the unique, let me put it this way, attributes, should I put it use that word, of family businesses. And so they treated the family business as a corporate. And in fact, some of their behavior was appalling, to be honest with you. And it damn near destroyed the company. You need people who have great business experience, absolutely, but they need to know how family businesses operate. And family businesses at times are messy, and at times are not as quick to make decisions, or they need to talk and all that sort of thing. Frankly, at times, a family business will make decisions faster than just about anybody else. But you know, you do need that dual level of skills of good business acumen for your directors, as well as knowledge of how family businesses work. And that's really the key thing. When you think about the board, you've got two options. You've got an option of going for the advisory board or the board of directors. Whichever you go, it's having a board set up, and they do not have to be expensive. There's a sort of thing out there that you end up paying a lot of money. Now you can, but you don't have to. We've set up advisory boards with family businesses where they're probably turning over 5 or 10 million. And the board is working really well for them. And so, you know, it's even at that smaller end, it can be really useful. Whatever you're doing, right, the opportunity to get independent advice, independent ideas, a new way of looking at things. Board members, whether they're advisory board or board of directors, will often bring in contacts and so on and so on. There's just a lot that they potentially can offer you. The board is focusing on the business strategy. You know, it's the board's job to build the strategy, design the strategy, and make sure it gets implemented. They're not so much focused on family issues, which is, I guess, refreshing at one level. However, they've also got to make sure that they are aligned with what the family wants. And again, this is a point I want to really bring out near the end of this webinar, that the family gives the direction and the board provides the decisions. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And I think that was really what I was referring to, right? The board needs to get guidance from the family, but the board is the one that makes the decisions, not the family. And again, for very important reasons, the primary one is you don't want anybody who's not a director to be labeled as a shadow director. Now, at the time of this recording in Australia, there is a particularly well-known businessman who is being accused of being a shadow director, and that is going through the courts right now. You really don't want to be in that situation. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So let's look at the pros. Now, my apologies, this is quite a dense slide, so I'll go through it and hopefully it'll be not too boring on this, but there are clearly clear pros of being an advisory board. It's not a legally constituted decision-making board. The family is firmly in control. We've got one family where the mum and dad are the directors. They have between 8 and 9, sometimes 10 advisors on their board, and they love it. And they sit there and they say, you know, we're surrounded by these really smart people who have great ideas. They make the ultimate decisions, but it works very well. Some people on that board have been there, or that advisory board, pardon me, been there for 20 years, right? Some have been there for 6 months. They find it particularly useful. You've got external people who are coming in with different eyes and communication language, talk about different blinkers. They see the big picture, and they can really, you know, give you another way of looking at things here. They're a superb set of sounding boards and ideas and expertise and contacts. They are able to hold family members accountable. The advisory boards that I'm on, we hold the family members who are in the business very accountable. But an advisory board has no formal power on this. Only the directors have formal power. And as long as there's a good working relationship, it actually works quite well. And the board, and whether it's an advisory board or a board of directors, can be particularly helpful in giving an objective, independent view on potential successes coming up through the family. So the next generation starting to move into the business. And they can often say things and make recommendations that family members can't, which is actually really just being frank about, you know, someone's abilities or otherwise. It's a very good platform when you have an advisory board that you're working on the business rather than in the business. I mean, we all, those of us who run businesses, you know, there's so much to do in the business, but to actually focus on it can be a challenge. Having a board, advisory or otherwise, forces you to do that, right? You've got at least 4 meetings a year where you're actually sitting there looking at what's happening with the business. It challenges the family to really look at things differently. Changes, opportunities, improvements. I heard of an advisory board who did an assessment of the business, and they came back and they said to the 2 directors, you can raise your prices by 6% and it will all be fine. And the directors looked at them and they said, look, we've done the analysis, you know, this is our area of expertise. So they went and raised their prices 6% and everything was fine. And 6% immediately went straight on the bottom line. Now, those advisors absolutely paid their fees for many, many, many years with that bit of advice. This is the sort of potential that can really come along. Advisory boards are cheaper. Usually, you're paying the advisor's daily rate. You're not paying director's fees. You're not paying director's insurance or expenses necessarily, although your advisors may have some expenses there, but generally they're cheaper. And they can be moved on really easily. You can just say, thank you, but we don't want to see you anymore. Directors, you can, but it takes a little bit more. It's a legal thing with directors. Advisors, it's not a legal thing. And of course, when you want to bring on a new advisor, very, very easy. You know, you just work out what are the skills and knowledge that we need. You know, maybe there's a change in the organization or a change in the strategy or the direction. You can bring a new person in and you might have them on for a year, 6 months, 10 years, whatever, right? But, you know, that's that flexibility. And as I was saying, that mother and father who have their advisory board, that's exactly what they value with us. The cons of an advisory board. Their effectiveness is really dependent on whether the directors respect the advice and listens to them. If they're not going to do that, don't have an advisory board. No, we don't waste your time. You know, if there's not that level of respect, you're completely and utterly wasting everyone's time. And also, if there isn't a level of solid discussion, what I call robust debate, where ideas are challenged and allowed to be challenged, right? If you want to just listen to your own words, then don't have an advisory board. If there's no respect and shared vision, if there's no agreement on the direction you're going, and we've spent quite a lot of time talking to owners around what do you want to do with this business? Because once we know what that is, we can set up the strategy, but we need to know what they want, how hard they want to drive that business, what do they want, what's their role, all that sort of thing. And those sort of things have to be aligned up. Otherwise, it gets pretty ineffective here. If advisors get too close to family members, you get a problem where they might not be as frank in their advice as they need to be. Part of their job that you're actually asking them to do is give frank and fearless advice. If they get too close or they lose they get worried about offending people, there is a challenge there. And because there's no skin in the game, an advisor, you come in, it's all care and no responsibility. They can, their advice is often pretty good, but they don't have to do anything with it. If you take it, great. If you don't, that's also fine. But there's no risk for them. With directors, there's risk. And so, you might get, there's potential for getting a slightly more deliberated decision. And, each time, because you're paying advisors by the hour, if you're in touch with them, in between meetings and so on, potentially you're incurring fees there. Depends how you set it up. Where directors, it's like you just call them, they're effectively paid a set fee and that's it. Pros of a board of directors as opposed to an advisory board. It's a legally constituted board. The directors are registered and it has real decision-making power. And I'd add there responsibilities, right? Getting outside directors in, again, provides that big picture stuff, which is really important. They'll bring, years of experience and knowledge and contacts in there, which is just what I was saying there. And they're a very good sounding board. Right? So similar to an advisory board in a way. One of the big differences is that they're able to really hold family members in the business accountable because they're accountable, right? Business directors, formal directors in a business, as it says there, are mandated to hold people in the business to account. They have legal fiduciary duties to that business as a director. So, it is very important. It's a very, very important role. If things go wrong, the people who are going to sue people are the directors, right? So, they are very concerned to make sure that things run well and are looked after properly. Again, they are just as useful when you're looking at potential successes for the next generation, coming into the business. And again, same with, great in terms of getting the family to be working on the business, the strategy, rather than just focusing on what's going on in the business at the moment. They challenge the family just as an advisory board does. However, there's some cons. And so it's not so easy to move new directors in. I mean, it's possible. It's entirely possible at the shareholders' direct discretion, frankly. But with an advisor, you just say, go away. All right. With directors, there's a formal process and it's legal. They tend to be more expensive. You're paying directors' fees, directors' insurance expenses, that sort of thing. Invariably, they are more expensive. Sacking them is, as I said earlier, is more difficult. They're legally part of the business. Either the majority of the board agrees to sack the director or it's done by the shareholders. So, it can be done, but it just takes a little bit more. Again, like an advisory board, they can be completely ruled ineffective if there isn't some sort of proper, good debate, discussion that is going on within the boardroom. Groupthink is just as much a problem in board of directors as any other group. Again, if there's no respect or shared vision, if they don't know what the family wants, and because the directors have, as I said earlier, a legal and fiduciary duty to the business. They have, real responsibilities. They are held to this legally. And so they're interested in how the business is run, how the risk is being managed, what is the strategy, that sort of thing. Some families find this challenging because they're used to running their own show. Now, you bring in directors, they absolutely have a duty to know what's going on, and so for some families, this can be just sort of opening the kimono a little bit, and they get a little bit freaked by it. So be careful. Director responsibilities, right now. The Australian Institute of Directors talks about the 6 areas: right? Strategy, business performance, compliance, resources, risk, and accountability. And this is what all directors in a business are responsible and held accountable for. So, as I said earlier, developing the strategy and making sure that that's starting to be implemented appropriately by the management team. What is the financial performance of the business? Is it working? Is it making money? Or is it starting to trade insolvently? They are very focused on that. They want to know what the rate of growth is, when the financials come in, they're looking at that and looking at ways that can be improved. Compliance around regulations, whether this is OH&S, whether this is safety, whether this is all sorts of things that are going on, and that links into the risk area as well. Does the business have enough resources to actually do what it needs to do? Does it have enough money? That sort of thing. And the directors hold management accountable. I've been working with the board in the last 12, 18 months, and there were some changes made in the board. The management were held accountable, but in fact, the way it was happening, it was driving the management team absolutely around the bend, to the point where the management was starting to resign. They've got a new board, or they made some changes now. Now, the management is still held accountable, and when I've been talking to management, they actually like it, but they actually feel like there's a level of trust and respect there. And that's the way that this new board is holding them accountable, and they're getting very, very good results from this. So those are the 6 core areas that a director is being held accountable for. Let's go up a little bit to shareholders, right? They're the owners of the business. And there's also in family business, there's all sorts of ways that ownership is structured in terms of might be done in trusts and all that sort of thing to protect assets. But effectively, the shareholders, that's their gig, they own the business. Now, at one level, they don't have a lot to do. One of the key things they've got is the hiring and firing of directors. And it is very important in a family business that, from our perspective anyway, that the family is always in control of the business. Now, whether this is always ensuring that there are more family directors than non-family directors on there, that's one thing. But as shareholders, you always have the right to fire directors. All right? And so make sure that ultimately, and hopefully it doesn't ever come to this, but hope for the worst, plan for the worst, hope for the best. You need to be able to make sure that the family always has control of what is going on. And one of those key levers is that ability to hire and fire directors here. As shareholders, you receive dividends from the business. The level of dividends is, in fact, supposed to be decided by the board. There's often a little bit of gray area in some family businesses around that. You might get external, like banks and so on, who might be limiting the amount of dividends that can go out. But it's normally a board decision, because the board, again, is responsible for the financial health of the business, right? Above a certain percentage of shareholding, and if you've got a number of different shareholders, family members as shareholders, they might claim to have a certain seat on the board. There's no hard and fast rule. I think broadly 10 to 15%, and someone can demand a seat on the board. It'll also partly depend on what says in your constitution. But certainly, someone who's got a significant amount of shares may well have a right to demand a seat on the board. That sometimes creates a few issues with some families here. And of course, in family businesses, there's a complexity, because shareholders can also be the directors, they can also be family members, they can be the managers, they can be mum, dad, kids, uncles, aunts, right? So the key thing in a lot of this is, which hat are you wearing? Are you wearing your shareholders hat right now? Are you wearing your director's hat, your mum hat, your dad hat, your manager's hat? And so it's very, very important to know which conversation are we having. For a lot of family businesses, and the reality is, the shareholders' meetings aren't that important, right? It might be just mum and dad. That's fine. As the next generation comes in, that shareholders meeting becomes more important, particularly if you've got a sibling group that are now shareholders. Probably only need to meet once a year. It does just depend, but it's managing the hats and knowing which conversation is very, very important. Family business shareholders, right? As I said before, you really want the family to have a controlling share and being in control of the business. There are stories around, and they're usually around English family businesses where people have lost the business or whatever it is. Now, actually, it's not that difficult to set up a system where it ensures that the family has control. Just make sure it is working. Get good, solid legal advice on that. Our general take around minor shareholders is don't have them, quite frankly. I know that some family businesses do have a minority shareholders involved because they've injected capital and all that sort of thing. And it can work well, but they can also be a real challenge and a real problem. In one case, we know, legal action was taken. Our general advice is don't give away shares. Now, there's sometimes pressure from employees that they want to be shareholders, right? And again, I'm very clear on this, don't do that. There are ways that you can reward employees without making them shareholders, and it becomes the same thing. Proxy shareholders, there's a number of initiatives. In fact, Steve Booth, who works with us, has a number of superb ideas around how you do that. You do not have to give them shares, and you don't then create the problem of having minority shareholders around the place. Shareholder agreements are really important. And this is potentially if there is a conflict or a falling out, and or to protect assets. And this is a whole other area in family business. How do we protect the assets, if there's a marriage breakdown and part of the family and that sort of thing. Shareholder agreements are important. They're, again, plan for the worst, hope for the best. Nut them out, get them clear, and then put them in a drawer. And hopefully that's where they stay. The moment you find yourself reaching for your shareholders agreement, really what it's telling you is that the relationships are broken down to the point where you can't have the conversations. You're now looking at, well, what actually are my voting rights here? So they are important, they are needed, and they need to be in place. And as I said, shareholder agreements are part of protecting family assets. It is critical. It is really critical, but it's not easy. There are not many surefire ways that are easy to implement, let me put it that way. And the family courts are finding more and more ways to look into things like trusts and so on. And so you need to be really careful, and you need to get really top-notch legal advice around this. This is a specialist area. And there are legal people, and we can certainly tell you who to go to for this, who really know their stuff and do their best. Now, as I said, there's nothing's perfect, and it will differ from family to family, but protecting the assets is very, very important. Succession of directorships and shareholding. Now, when we talk about succession, and we've got whole other webinars on this, I'm just going to touch on the space a little bit here. Often we think of succession around either just ownership or who's going to lead the business, who's going to take over, right? But actually, we've got to think through the succession of directorship. And if you have a number of family lines starting to develop in the family business, does each family line have a directorship or a seat on the board? And also, obviously, how do you pass the shareholding on? And if there's different percentages in different family lines and all that sort of thing, how do you manage all that? With shareholding, are you passing ownership on as part of your estate planning, i.e. part of your will, or does it start earlier? And there's pros and cons for both of these. Starting earlier enables the next members of the next generation who are going to become shareholders or owners can start to become part of or have real shareholder meetings. and they can start to get their head around what it actually means to be a shareholder of sometimes these very complex and very large businesses. Estate planning is not too bad. Particularly when you've just got, say, mum and dad, because inevitably when one dies, they pass their stuff onto the remaining partner, and then when they go, it gets passed down to the family. If you've got, say, 3 siblings and who are shareholders, that gets a little bit more complex because sometimes there's challenges and risks with who dies first. And I hate to be talking this way, but these are the conversations that we actually have to have. Again, good legal advice here is critical. In terms of particularly around, planning your will and so on. And again, there are experts who are just really bloody good at this, and get in touch. We can let you know who to talk to. And you're passing on the directorships. This is a really important conversation because we know that if you are a director, you have significant responsibilities. You've really got to know your stuff. So who in the family, if you're talking family here, has the knowledge and skills and experience and is prepared to take on these responsibilities? Because, if the business goes south, then, all the creditors are going to be coming for the directors. They're the ones who are going to get sued. So be very careful about whether you take on a directorship, not only just from a knowledge and skills perspective, but managing the risk as well. So there's a lot around this. As I said earlier, if you've got different family trees or family lines, pardon me, then does each family line have a representative on the board? And some families do this. And those directors may not be maybe as skilled or as knowledgeable or as experienced as we might expect a director to be, but they are part of the board and they're aware of what's going on, and then they can take that information back to the family. The families, go a couple of different ways around this, and so there's a fair bit to think through. You need to also make sure that the family wishes and any legal documents that you have got set up, constitution, shareholder agreements, that sort of stuff, are congruent. We recently came across a case where it was not congruent, and the family thought, yeah, no, it's all good. But actually, when we got some legal advice, they were saying 2 different things. And so it's really important, and this gets into a lot of legalese, a lot of being really clear. What is that legal document saying? What are the implications of that? And you need advice on that. And making sure that, yes, it fits with the family's wishes. For example, when we're developing a family charter with the family, what the family charter does is it really clarifies the wishes of the family for the direction of this business. And then we then get the legal documents to mirror that, or to get that happening. But it is really important that they are congruent. Now, some of the challenges that we've got here. Be very, very aware. I mentioned this earlier, the hat that you're wearing, which conversation are you having? And you've got the same people often in the same roles. So we sometimes recommend you only have shareholders meetings in one place, directors meetings in another place, and management meetings somewhere else. This is a challenge here. And also knowing what are the responsibilities and limits for each role. What is the responsibility, say, of management versus directors and so on. And when you're wearing your director hat, what are you responsible for? You need to know the legal implications here. It's all very well to be running a business and be a director, but in some situations, the legal implications can be absolutely enormous here. Get your legal documents well written and in place, but also don't over-engineer it. It's again, you need good legal advice. Some family businesses and family offices are extremely complex, but some get just so over-engineered. There is a middle ground in all this. So I mentioned before I wanted to talk about family council versus the board. The family council, as I said, is to the family what the board is to the business. And so family council, just to recap, is your core family members, if you like, the leaders of the family. Could be mum, dad, and the kids. And sometimes involves the in-laws, sometimes doesn't. It varies from family to family. But the family council is there to manage the family affairs, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's investments, whether it's someone's in distress, whether someone needs some help, whether it's providing support around education, all of that sort of thing. And the family council meets twice a year. The board is obviously running and responsible for the good running and effective running of the business, managing risk and all that sort of thing. They need to be able to talk to one another. As I said earlier, we used to have the chair, non-family chair of the board, come over and brief the family council and get a sense of what was going on. And sometimes they'd ask the family council questions in terms of, are you comfortable if we go in this direction, or what direction do you want us to go in this particular issue? And then they could take that information back to the board, and the board would then make decisions. There's a very important distinction between direction and decision. You want good communication, as I said there. So let's go through and break this down a little bit here. So the board is responsible, as we said, for the strategy of the business, financial well-being, and they report to the family council and possibly also to the shareholders. It depends on, sometimes the shareholders and the family council are one and the same thing. Sometimes they are different here. Their job is to hold management, which is sometimes themselves, accountable, for business outcomes on that. The family council, well-being of family members, as I said earlier, investments, philanthropy, family events, and assessing and monitoring business performance. And sometimes we get the family council who's wanting to push the board, and sometimes the board is wanting to push the family. Because family businesses tend to look a long way ahead. We have one family business we work with which has a 200-year time frame, another one that's got a 90-year time frame, right? They will often look way in the future, more than the board is at times. And so the family will say, actually, no, we want to invest in that area because we know very, very long term we will reap the benefits of that. But they might not be getting the shorter term returns, which the board is often looking at. The board, classic, noses in, fingers out. They are not operational. They should not be directly contacting management and getting involved there. It's a very good phrase to keep in mind. They're the ones really that are making the decisions around the family dividend. Sometimes boards and family businesses have had to say there will be no family dividend, either of business conditions, or we've decided that, and with the family council's effective agreement, that we're going to invest and buy another asset or something like that, and we need to, not allow dividends for a year or two. But that really is a board decision. They're making investment decisions, again, aligned with the family, where the family council gets these reports from the board. They are responsible for the development of the next generation, often in combination with the board. So we often work with families where the next generation come in and will sit as observers of the board, so they can get their head around the complexity of what the board is talking about and the issues that the board is dealing with. They might be providing educational support. So they're providing guidance on the direction of the business and the investments, but does not make the final decisions. Now, sorry, there is one exception to that. If the family council is managing the investments, yes, they're making the decisions. But on the business, it is the board that must make the final decisions. And this is, again, is that issue around shadow directors that I mentioned earlier. So, summary, the board takes direction and makes decisions around the business. So they find and decide, say, certain businesses or investments or what they're going to do. The family council provides the direction, but doesn't make the decisions. All right, that's the board. So again, the linking between the two, the communication between the two is really very important. And this is what makes a really good family business hum there. Again, you've got to be very aware of the hats. You've often got the same people in the family council, or some of the same people anyway, who are also directors and are on the board. And so, again, just be careful of which hats you're wearing at that point and what you're actually doing and what you're actually responsible for. Now, I think this is the end of this particular webinar. When we actually run this live, it is longer because we have a lot more Q&A and interaction here. I hope you found this useful. Please feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions or you need some clarification, or if you want any thoughts on, if you want some legal advice, not from us, but we can put you on to people who can give you legal advice around how to set this up. It is very important. At one level, it's not rocket science, but get it right and it can do some amazing things for your business. Thank you for watching. Please stay in touch and let us know your thoughts. Look forward to catching up soon.